Welcome back. The Mexican cartels continue their deadly march unabated, enabled by the Biden administration's broken border policies. This is also causing tension between the U.S. and Mexican governments. Officials from both countries held a security meeting last week, both sides agreeing that more needs to be done to attack the cartel's business interests. Now, all this comes after Mexico's raised concerns over Biden's asylum policies, which are helping, again, fuel the drug and human trafficking operations happening and playing out in Mexico and across our border. Joining us now to talk more about this situation is a former U.S. attorney and the executive director of Right on Crime, Brett Tolman. Also joining us is Bryan LeBaron. He's a family member of the 9 Mormon women and children who were murdered in northern Mexico back in 2019, that incident known as the LeBaron-Langford Massacre. Gentlemen, great to have you with us.
Thanks for having us.
Bryan, I want to start with you and your friend, Bel Murrieta, who is an attorney who was assassinated last week. He was an advocate for folks working against the cartels, an attorney for your family as well, murdered in cold blood in broad daylight. And we want to warn everybody, we have video of the aftermath of that. It's hard to see, it is blurred out, but it's important to tell the story of what's happening down in Mexico. Bryan, tell us about your friend Bel Murrieta and what's happening down there as the result of the Biden administration's border policies.
You know, the cartels are more emboldened than ever, and it's truly unfortunate because it's the heroes like Abel, a wonderful man. It breaks my heart to see what happened to him. A good friend of ours, family attorney, responsible for helping us try to seek justice in the case of the 9 women and children murdered. But again, as you mentioned, he was assassinated in broad daylight around all kinds of cameras and in a major city in Mexico. And unfortunately, it's these type of heroes who speak up, who say they're tired of the cartels running their town, running their government, running their municipality that are targets. And it's incredibly sad. I don't know if you're aware, but Abel was the 82nd politician murdered in this election season alone in Mexico. It is completely control. The people are afraid to run for office, especially people who want to combat the violence and the insecurity that plagues Mexico. And there were over 140 people killed associated with the campaigns in this election season, 82 actual politicians. So anybody that says that the narcos are not running this country or at least in control of the vast majority of the national territory simply doesn't understand the influence that they in the will that they impose on the Mexican people. Violence.
That's incredible to hear. Over 80 politicians running for office murdered as a result of their objection to the cartels running the country. Brett, back in March, Mexican President Manuel Lopez Obrador referred to Biden as the migrant president, saying they see him as the migrant president, so they feel they're going to reach the United States. And these are the folks paying the cartels to take them here. I also saw that more fentanyl has been confiscated on the U.S.-Mexico border by U.S. Customs and Border Protection so far this year, and we're only in May, than all of last year, all of 2020. It just goes to show you that these cartels feel like they can operate with impunity.
They really do feel that way. And let's really, call it out for what it is. When you have a weak president on immigration, and especially on this border, the cartel utilizes that to their benefit. They start pushing individuals, and they use their leverage to push their drugs across. They then have control of both the individuals' lives as well as the drugs that are going back and forth. There's a reason why they're becoming emboldened. Bryan was accurate that this year is unlike any, and why? It's not a coincidence that we have the weakest president and we have the weakest policies and we have a refusal to strengthen the border. A strong border is a strength for the United States and for Mexico. If you don't have that, we're going to continue to see a reign of terror and drugs that this country has yet to see.
Now, here's one specific example of how strained this relationship has become between the U.S. and Mexico, and perhaps an example of the corruption maybe involved here. Last October, the DEA arrested a Mexican defense minister named General Salvador Cienfuegos Zapata at the Los Angeles airport. He was known as the Godfather, according to the DEA. He helped a specific cartel that, quote, routinely engaged in wholesale violence, including torture and murder, to operate with impunity in Mexico. And that comes from the charging documents from federal investigators. But the charges were later dropped by the Attorney General then, William Barr. Do we know why, Bryan?
You know, there's all kinds of theories, but I will tell you this. The president of Mexico, López Obrador, came on national TV and promised that there would be a fair trial in the case of Cienfuegos. And I think part of the negotiations was a promise to both representatives of the DEA and William Barr's office that there would be a just and fair trial. And unfortunately, I believe it's because Cienfuegos and the cartels hold so much influence, even over the federal government, that all charges were dropped. They didn't even do an investigation. And that is really the root of the issue. When you have people at the top levels of government involved in protecting the cartels, what hope do the citizens have? What hope do we have of ever getting this violence and the drug trafficking under control? And I hope and pray that something will be done to hold to account General Cienfuegos, and that there will be a thorough investigation done. Otherwise, I can promise you it will be one of the greatest injustices to the Mexican people and to the American people. When you think about the record number of Americans, young Americans especially, that are dying every year due to fentanyl, and most of those come across the border. But let me just bring one point. I'm here in Mexico. I'm talking to the people, and I can tell you they see the Biden administration now as a very immigrant-friendly administration. I've talked to you guys. They basically do a cost-risk analysis. They say, hey, I had a person tell me the other day, hey, my cousin's going to go attempt to cross the border illegally, because the worst they're going to do is just turn them right back around. And when they know that they can earn 10 times more income at least by crossing the border illegally and working in the United States, that risk, they're going to take that risk every time. Yeah. And to me, it's kind of a joke. And listening to the politicians talk about dealing with the root causes. I'll tell you what the root causes of illegal immigration from Mexico are. It's poverty and violence. Right. And if you're going to cure poverty and violence, yet you can't spend the money and the resources to control your border, I mean, it's never going to happen. It's a fantasy. And to hear the president of Mexico talk about a program called Sembrando Vida, planting trees. His proposal to President Biden was, let's have a program where we pay people to plant trees so that they have a job, and that will deal with the root cause. It's a ridiculous fantasy that's never going to work. This issue has to be taken seriously by both governments, and something has to be done.
Brett, real quick to you, about 30 seconds left. I mean, for the federal government to arrest a former Mexican defense secretary and general at the Los Angeles airport, that must have been a massive investigation. And then just to turn him loose to Mexico and drop the charges here in the States, how strange is that?
Yeah, it's unusual. It also resulted in basically undermining the credibility that they had. Remember, at this time, they were also considering designating the cartels as a foreign terrorist organization. Would have had large ramifications had they done that, but they backed away from that. Mm-hmm. Now we see what happens when you even embrace actually the illegal immigration that's occurring. Crime, violence, drugs, that's what happens.
Brett, Bryan, thank you guys for sharing this story with us. We'll check back with you and keep us posted.
Thanks, John.
Brett Tolman and Bryan LeBaron for us. All right, coming